Okay, and double check it. Okay, well, let me do the attendance for those in the classroom. See, we have a computer taking its time. It's Adam here.
Yep.
Okay. Riley, you're there. Noah. What's your name back there in the back, sir? Ryan? Okay. Mark you down. And let's see, I think I saw Natalie here. Okay, so first things first. As you have probably been made aware of, the school is using a new AI detector called Pangram. I spent time talking to Dr. Morsink, the instructional, that's a hard word to say, instructional designer, and Dean Kelly. And I'm going to relate to you what needs to be done. Okay. If you use AI literally for anything, for a discussion or an assignment, literally anything. If you use it to look up how to spell a word, if you use it to see how to format something, if you use it for inspirational ideas, if you're doing research on there, you need to include the blurb, and it's available. There's an exact word you can do a blurb. You can do word for word, copy and paste it. It's in the AI guidebook that the school has put out. Use that in every single thing, whether it's in your references, whether it's a discussion or an assignment, a project, just include that in there. Even if all you did was edit or help to format your assignment, include it. It's better to be safe than sorry, okay? Because Pangram is really, really sensitive. I mean, seriously, if you use it to write one sentence, it will pick it up. And so I'm just letting you know. Now, if you do get tagged as having used AI and you haven't declared it, this is an opportunity to have a discussion with that professor, be it me or someone else. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you go through the process. I'm going to find out how did you do this assignment? And we're going to find out where AI entered into the picture. Because you may not fully even be cognizant, because let's face it, you guys have had technology your whole life. Okay. And so for you, using something might be really just, well, I'm just using this. Well, it turns out it might be AI or AI based. And so just being aware of what you're doing and just covering yourself. And so this is a chance to really to become better academic writers using this new tool. AI is a wonderful tool if we use it properly. And I say that including the we in there because, as you know, I write academically. And I need to make sure that things are done properly. In the past, I would always use Grammarly to do a final edit of my paper. Now, I didn't use the predictive or generative feature that it has. I would just go with like the word substitutions and the punctuation. And so, like my conference paper and my dissertation, I ran them through Panagram just the other day, Friday, to see if mine would come up because I knew I used Grammarly and it didn't. So if you're using Grammarly for spell check or for making sure you got the right punctuation, little things like that, you shouldn't have a problem. Okay. But if you use anything that's predictive text, it'll pop up as AI. All right. So this last week, when I graded everything for this class, um, no one lost points for anything that came up. I think I only had maybe one or two people per class that I have that didn't have an AI alert through Pangram. And so I'm just making sure all my classes are getting the same information today. I try to make sure you all are informed. So just make sure you do that in the future. So literally, if you use AI or anything that's AI based, literally for anything, just include the blurb that's included in the AI guidebook, okay? Any questions? Okay. Howie, are you able to hear me? I hope so, because I don't feel like saying everything again. Let's see. Okay, cool. I see that message. Thank you. And we got Simba. Let me mark you down as here. Okay, so now today I am going to be doing the dual wielding of computers for the PowerPoint. I've got two screens with identical slides up, and so I just have to remember to hit both these buttons. Otherwise, one group will be behind and one group won't be. So just bear with me while I get back into that habit. It's been a good 6 months since I've had to do it like this. So let's get started. Okay. Now let's get started. Okay, this week we're going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and a few things like that. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that this is a course at a university. This is an ethics course, a philosophy course. We talk about stuff here. If you have heard, in politics, DEI has become the target of much controversy. Okay. This room is not the place for that controversy. I'm not going to engage in it, and I hope that you won't either. We're looking at what is ethical. And I will start by saying that my entire dissertation was founded on DEI. Okay. As some of you may already know. Well, DEI is not something that's new. It's literally a couple thousand years old. This is not some new idea that humanity came up with. If you're of the Christian faith, Jesus actually says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, that's the core essence of DEI. That same sentiment is found in most of the major world religions. And so this concept of treating people fairly and equitably, of including others, is found in the religious texts that span several thousand years. So this isn't a new concept. So we're not going to get hung up in where we are today as a people. Is it good? Is it bad? We're just going to really talk about how does it benefit employees? How does it benefit the organization? Any questions about that so far? Okay. So like I said right here, it's was the theoretical framework of my doctoral dissertation. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. It's also known as EDI, depending on the source you're looking at. They're vital in today's globalized business climate, since they can improve employee motivation and engagement. If I am going to engage in a business meeting with somebody from Singapore, I first am going to go to either Hofstede's Cultural Dimension Study or Trompener's Cultural Dimension Study. I'm going to see what is that culture like? How are they different from the culture I'm used to? Because if I go into the business meeting, and those of you who have had me in class before, you know I happen to like humor. I love humor. I used to do comedy and entertainment in general. Well, if I go into a business meeting and I give a joke, if I say a joke at the beginning that kind of break the ice, in that culture in Singapore, that scene is very improper. I won't close that business deal. But if I do my homework first, using one of these cultural dimension studies, I know to subdue my humorous side in that meeting. Now, ideally, my interlocutors, the other party, would actually do the same. And they would see, oh, Americans use a lot of humor. Okay, so what happens? We both would end up tailoring the way we present ourselves in that meeting, and we'd wind up in that middle zone where we really want to be. That middle zone is really profitable. It's beneficial. Now, if they don't do a cultural dimension study and see how the other culture is different, and they go into it, it's okay that I form myself to fit that culture for that meeting. I'm not going to be upset about that. I'm not going to be, well, they didn't do it, and they're not going to meet me in the middle. No, I'm not going to do that. The responsibility is on me. And if they take the responsibility as well, great. If not, it's going to be great. And so it's important that we know how that other culture views things like diversity, inclusion, equity. What does it mean to treat somebody who is South Korean equitably? Is it the same as here in America? What about the social structure? How are their family units put together? Knowing little things like this help us when we go into business meetings. And it helps us when we're developing policies for an organization that is a multinational global company, because we may have employees from these countries. We may have customers and other stakeholders from these countries. And so to understand how to best relate with them in a way that they receive as positive is only going to benefit our organization. While there is currently a debate, already talked about that, don't need to go further into that. Okay, so your textbook pointed out that there are a lot of There's a lot more diversity in the workplace today when compared to even a few decades ago. If we look back to, let's say, the 1940s, 1950s, that was a different era in many ways. One, women were just getting their foot really into the workforce. And that was because of World War II. Most of the men went off the war, so we had to have somebody run the factories. So you have Rosie the Riveter. I don't know if you've ever seen the advertisements, the bandana, the power, and all that stuff. Okay, we had women out there in the shipyards building ships. We had them in factories making vehicles and tanks and armament. And when the guys came back from war, the women didn't want to leave the workplace. They had experienced being out in public, they had experienced earning money, and there's a sense of self-worth that can come from that. Okay, so in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, the ideal American family was still the woman at home. You look at TV shows like Leave It to Beaver and stuff like that. Jane Ward, she was a home mom, and being a house mother, a housewife was considered that was the ideal thing. We go into the 60s and that countercultural revolution that occurred, the hippie movement, well, that began to break down further. And then in the 70s, even on TV, you find things like Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was a single woman with a professional career who was successful. That was like novel. Well, here we are today. It's 2026. The idea of a woman having a job, being a lawyer, working in manufacturing, being a doctor, women have typically always been nurses, so that wasn't anything changed there, but to be a doctor, that was a big move. We're used to that now, okay? So if we look back to those time periods, we can see that was a less diverse and less inclusive time period. Is it possible that this increase in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, do you think that's due because of globalization? Because there was a time where we did our business here. We didn't have customers and vendors outside of our nation. Typically, we were very regionalized. Well, World War II made it, the whole world got involved in that war, just like World War I. Those two wars fairly close to each other. The world began interacting more. So now what we see is a Japanese car maker, Toyota, teaming up with an American car maker to work on projects together. And so we see a lot more of this multiculturalism in our workplaces. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, okay? To have somebody from another culture who grew up in a different environment, whose social structure, their family structure was different, gives them a different perspective. Maybe they even have a different religion. That's awesome. Because their different perspective I can use and benefit from as a leader of an organization. We can sit down and we can work on decision making, and I can get viewpoints that are not mine. If I'm only sitting down with people that share my social norms, my views, then I'm stuck in an echo chamber. They're saying the same things back to me that I'm already thinking. And there's no progress to be found there. Innovation is not going to be found. But if I have people that can actually give me a different perspective, we can reach innovation. We can actually make change happen and occur. Excuse me. My ears sometimes cut out. It gets real weird. You kind of lose balance for a minute. It's fun. The joy of getting old. Now, what about a more mobile workforce? You see, there was a time period, as you learned last week, where people would go and get a job and they'd be there for 30, 40 years. They'd retire, have a party, and get a gold watch. That was your career. Now, people join the workforce and they might move every 3 or 4 years to a different company. And there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, I think it's a wonderful change because if I'm with one company, I, as an individual, can become complacent. I can become stagnant intellectually. But if I'm going to different companies, one, I can get higher and better positions, more responsibility. Two, I can be exposed to more ideas, more people, more perspectives. I'm all about perspective. Okay. So I think the mobile workforce is actually a big part of it as well. So we have the globalization and a mobile workforce. I think they both contribute. While communication can be difficult at times due to language, cultural, and religious barriers, these can be turned into strengths under the right leadership. If you've got a leader who, now remember, management is procedural, leadership is relational. Managers should be leaders, but oftentimes they're not. They may be very good at the procedure. As a matter of fact, they might even have their MBA. Now, what's different between an MBA or a DBA, which is a master's of business administration, or a doctor of business administration, and the path I took? I don't have an MBA. I have a couple masters, but my business related one is in executive leadership. My MPhil is in management, specializing in leadership. My PhD is specializing in leadership and organizational strategy. I went with the human side. So I learned some of the nuts and bolts and procedural stuff, obviously, but I focus very intently on that relational aspect. And so I think, maybe I'm wrong, and I don't think I am, managers should also have the relational component as well. You should have the nuts and bolts of the operation and be able to develop the relationship. There are 6 of you right now. So if you are my employees and I'm your leader, your supervisor, your manager, even, how many relationships are there that I have to be cognizant of and aware of? Anybody want to give me a guess?
I remember last time you said it's everyone plus you plus one more.
Plus the whole group as a whole. Exactly. You pay attention. He's in 2 of my classes, so he gets some of this. Some of this stuff comes in twice. I'm impressed.
I was gonna say I feel like I wrote that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you have by now. So basically, I've got to have a relationship with, in this case, 6, 7, 8 individuals. So I got to have a working relationship with each one of you, then you as an entire group, because this team begins to have its own personality, affected by each person in it, but it has its own personality. Matter of fact, this group will have its own set of informal social norms, a code, not written down. And so I've got to know that. But I also have to know myself. Okay. Who am I? I can't lead others till I know who I am. What makes me tick? Where are my strengths, my weaknesses? Where am I deficient? Where are my errors, my flaws, my faults, my problems? And then the whole group as a team, as one individual. So there's really always more relationships involved. And a lot of people in a managerial position, they don't necessarily realize that. But if we have, and we got a good, you're from UK, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are from the Simba, where are you from? Zimbabwe, awesome. You, sir? Canada? Anybody else from outside of this country? Okay, so we have right here 4 nationalities represented. And this is wonderful for this right here. If we wanted to enter into a discussion about decision making, we're going to make a decision. We've got 2 females. We have 2 males from America, 3 males from abroad. We have a lot of different perspectives. That is wonderful because now each person should feel safe to say, well, what about this idea? Even if the rest of the group isn't going that direction, constructive dissent is wonderful. If you think we're headed the wrong way, Natalie throws her arm up and says, yeah, I think we could be more empathetic. She's probably right. Or maybe Ryan throws his hand up and says, well, what about this? And it's something we hadn't thought of before. And it opens up a new avenue. So this is a wonderful way of demonstrating how multiple perspectives can come together and really come up with something that is a policy. We could write a policy that is more inclusive of many more people groups this way. But the second that Simba's sitting back there and he looks around the room waiting to see who raises their hands up for different things. And I look around and Natalie's doing the same thing. And Ryan also. Now what's going to happen, you guys are going to agree by consensus. The majority rules in that. The problem there is we form groupthink and an echo chamber, and those are pitfalls. Those are traps. And so I would encourage everybody dissent, but make sure it's constructive. Destructive dissent is literally going to tear it apart. Constructive dissent will build things up. So I would want people to see things differently than me. Now, the in group versus the out group. Okay, this is This happens everywhere in friend groups, in social settings, in churches, in workplaces, and friend group, everywhere this happens. One factor that arises in today's workplace is the dynamics of human relationships and interconnection, which can be seen as the in group versus the out group mentality. This dynamic can be encouraged by the leadership. A leader can actually encourage people to push people away. Well, Riley is she's one of those, she's got colored hair and she's probably listens to like wild, crazy music, and she's in the other group. She's not like us. We're more professional minded. And so we start excluding her. We're not, please don't think that. And we start excluding her. She's now pushed into the other group. So we're not going to listen to her viewpoints, perspectives. We're not going to give any see anything she says as being really trustworthy. We're going to treat her differently. She walks in the room like, shh, shh, shh. That is horrible. That is absolutely horrible. And then if you want to know the theories that really help explain this, you can look at social role theory, social identity theory, social exchange theory. Um, and it's really, we got to look at how we treat people. The employees tend to follow what the senior leadership does. So if I push Riley out, the team is going to begin to push Riley out. Unless you as a team have really done the work and know who you are as individuals, and you're like, that's wrong. So Natalie, she's done the work. She took some philosophy courses and she did the work. She knows who she is. And she's like, no, 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 no. We can't do that to Riley. And so she basically starts rebelling because she's not pushing Riley out. And so that's a positive thing right there. If you ever have a leader that's starting to push people out, the way to actually cut against that is to side on the side of empathy. What would it feel like to be in Riley's shoes if we were doing that? That would be horrible. We've all been in groups where we've been kind of pushed to the side. Well, imagine that on a daily basis. That's that other group, the others. This can be mitigated by using social identity theory to better understand the barriers and find ways to reduce them. Social identity theory, in a nutshell, helps us to understand the behavior displayed within different groups. It can also help explain or help to understand the personal image each person has of themselves and how it impacts the group. Once again, turning back to my dissertation, social identity theory and social exchange theory were two of the main theories that I used in my framework. So social identity theory is you're a college student. You're around college attendees. You're around professors. You're in this realm of academia. So part of your identity becomes academic. Okay. Now let's look at another way here. You're on a sports team. What sport do you play? Baseball. Okay, so you hang out with baseball players. You hang out at practice. You do practice. You go to games. You think baseball. You probably watch baseball. Okay, you really like baseball. That has become part of your personality because of that group that you are a part of. We actually have, and I would guess we belong to typically, I'm going to say 5 to 7 groups when you look at them really sociologically, groups that really impact our identity. Now, you could sit there and go, I am who I am, who I am. Well, part of you is. But we are influenced by the groups that we associate with the most. And so look at who you associate with the most. Family. Even though you may not be living or associating right now, living with your family, you grew up there. And growing up there left an imprint on your actual identity and helped form who you are. Because during the formative years, so as a young child, really had an impact. Your family group, the friends of the family, extended family, really impacted a lot of your identity. But that doesn't stop there. When you would go out, when we work someplace, that place actually creeps into our identity. And that's not a bad thing. But recognizing this is really important. Okay. So when Natalie does that self-exploration work that she learned about in philosophy, and she's got to identify, okay, the core of who I am existentially, where's it coming from? Okay, family, friends, my best friend in high school, the people I hang out with at college, and the place I work. And she's able to identify that, and she finds the traits that she exhibits that really stem back to there. This is positive. Leaders need to do this. because now we can actually learn to use that in filtering some of the biases that come out. Everybody has bias. Everybody does. And it's actually incumbent upon each one of us to identify what it is. And if it's a negative thing, and most biases tend to be, we learn how to subdue it, rid ourselves of its effect, something to that effect. I, growing up as I did in predominantly white neighborhoods and towns and cities, and my dad being a pastor and all these different things, I should probably be pretty racist, especially returning to the place I graduated high school at. I went there with a significant other who was African American. And she goes, I just do not feel safe in this town. And I had never seen it before. But when I saw it through her eyes, I'm like, oh, crap. Yeah, you're right. Well, that identity could have been me. But I, being the rebel I am, had nothing in my mind but getting out of that town and living in cities, getting out of that little rural area, leaving my house, which was abusive, and getting out there and living my own life. And I took responsibility for the things that could have been bias in my life. And I've learned how to, they're not even in my mind. So we can kind of pick and choose the biases that we hold on to. We have that responsibility, but we got to do the work. Um, and social identity theory helps to explain a lot of this. This is why you see things like racism really seems to be generational. If a person's great grandparents were in the South, or great grandparents were in the South during the Civil War, and they've been living in the South as a family for all those decades, that person may have it really deeply ingrained into them to treat other people unfairly, to treat people of another people group as the others. And this is horrible because now what do we do with the other group? We dehumanize them. So back to may I pick on you again? Back to my example with Riley here. We begin to dehumanize her. Well, people who have purple hair, they're not very intelligent. Okay. They listen to music that just sounds like animals running around, and they do all these crazy things. And we come up with this stuff, and now we're dehumanizing her. What does that do? That gives us legitimacy for our bias in our mind. Also, it legitimizes us pushing her away, treating her unfairly. It's so much easier to treat somebody unfairly when we don't see them as being equals as humans. And that's a problem because every single human being is a human being, therefore an equal. Whether they've gone to college, wherever or not, whatever religion they are or not, or wherever, you see what I'm saying? Just a simple fact they're a human being, to me, that should be enough. Unfortunately, in sociology and psychology, that's not usually the case. So we go back and we see, where did I get these biases? What social groups impacted me the most? And now we as adults have the ability to extricate and surgically remove that out of us. And it can be painful, but it's worth it. To have a life without all the bias controlling the way you perceive things around you is wonderful because there's so many wonderful things to see in this world. And there's so many wonderful people to talk to. And there's so much wonderful music and all these different cultures and foods and family structures. And don't get me started. I told you, one of the purposes of my life is to experience all that I can. I can't do that if I'm stuck in the cell, the prison cell of my own bias. Inclusion. Byers and Stanberry defined inclusion as the engagement of all employees in the corporate culture. Mullen et al. Defined it as the process of how an organization makes sure its members from the majority and minority groups feel desired, valued, and appreciated. In other words, it is the proper and ethical treatment of employees within that organization that crosses any ethnic, cultural, or religious or gender barriers. Okay? Inclusion needs to cross all these barriers. Because if I'm going to include you, and Clark, I forgot his first name off the top of my head. Anyway, Clark in 2020 put out a book on psychological safety for teams. In that book, he says for inclusion safety, the one criteria is that the person is human. That means everybody should be welcome into that first stage. Now, if I'm hiring neurologists, that doesn't mean that just because a plumber is human, he's brought into the group of candidates that I'm hiring. Obviously, we have to have a little common sense. I'm going to look for people who are neurologists. Outside of them being neurologists and human, I don't care where they're from. I don't care what language they grew up with. I don't care what religion they are, what gender they are. If they're a qualified neurologist and they're actually a human being, so they're not an elephant or something like that, we bring them in as a candidate. That's what inclusion is. Byers and Stanbury noted that diversity is all about making sure each person has a chance to be included. So it's not something that's based on quota. And that's one of the misconceptions people have had about DEI is it's not quota based. When you really break down DEI is simply treating people like you want to be treated. By each person, the authors intend that all people, regardless of race, culture, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, are welcome to enter the applicant pool. Or once they're in the applicant pool, and if they're hired in our decision making, we're not coming into that hiring process with bias against somebody with purple hair. Yes. Yeah, the list would be we would need several slides if we were to list down every single one of them. Yes. Age, disability, all of them. Anything that we could use as a means of discriminating somebody would be included in that list. Absolutely. Good question. Diversity in organizations has its roots in the civil rights movement here in America. In other countries, it'd be founded in other things. It can be found in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The textbook also pointed out that diversity includes the following: women in the workplace, people from different cultures, and people from different nations. I put that because in one nation, we could have multiple cultures. You look at me, you may not think that genetically I am multicultural. I look like I'm just Caucasian, right? Well, I'm also part Micmac and part Maliseet. These are in the Algonquin Nation of Native Americans. Now, I am not full. I am not a member of the tribe. I am maybe 1/16th, 1/32nd, each of them. But for me, that gives me a perspective. How can I look against somebody else and judge them for their other cultural foundation, their ethnicity, if I myself am technically mixed? It's been a wonderful thing for me to have that, to realize that, to know that. My son has all the stuff I have, plus Navajo. His mother is Navajo and Mexican. He is like the Heinz 57 ketchup sauce. He is some of everything. And he's a wonderful, bright kid. But if I had a view that would push him away, that would break my heart. And I can't do that. I can't push somebody away because of their genetics. That's just ludicrous. It also includes people with different sexual orientations, people with disabilities, people from different age groups, and much, 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 much more. You can actually be biased against somebody because of how tall or not tall they are. You might be biased against short people, fat people, skinny people. You can be biased against somebody for any reason there is. And that's a problem because once we start doing that as an individual, we're pushing people out into the other category. We're treating them as being less than human. In other words, I'm more valuable than you are. And that is a pile of garbage. Due to society being made up of individuals, each with their own worldview, diversity in the workplace has taken a long time to get to where it is today. And it still has problems. I think in the not too distant past, we had actually gotten to a better place than we are now. I think that there's been a move away from diversity, inclusion, and equity. We've kind of drifted back a little, but you see that in society. When we go through and we look at time periods historically from a sociological perspective, we can see that society progresses not in a steady, sustained way, but in segments, and then go back, and then come back up a little further, and then go back. And that's because you got people here, a good sizable group of people that are trying to cling on to the old ways, the status quo, instead of embracing the chaos of this moment. Because if we embrace that chaos, we can actually, one, creativity can happen, and two, something wonderful can emerge. I choose to embrace things that allow for something wonderful to emerge. Not everybody does that. And so that right there creates this resistance against forward progression. And so we go forward a few steps, go backward a couple. Forward a few, go backward a few. But over time, hopefully, as a society, we've gone from this point over here in a sustainable way. Even if it's been in chunks going back and forth that whole time period, hopefully we get there at least one day and we're there. Diversity and inclusion can help businesses become more profitable by improving the interpersonal relationships between employees. If we've got a welcoming, inclusive, diverse staff, and our leadership is inclusive and diverse and treats people equitably, we're going to see something happen. The little groups that form the subgroups within this organization, the cliques of friendships that develop, they're not going to be pushing people out. Just because Natalie and Riley form this like little clique in our group, and you gentlemen form a group, you're not pushing anyone else out. It's just you happen to both like the same video game and you both happen to like the same type of music. Outside of that, really anyone's free to hang out with you. So we can see DEI can actually really flood through an entire organization at the individual personal level. But the leadership has got to create the right environment for that to happen. Communication can improve. Diversity and inclusion are the ethical approaches in business. The head of the NFL, about a year and a half ago, I think it was, he came out with a statement basically saying the NFL is going to retain DEI because it's the right thing to do. And that was a politically charged statement at that time. And the reason they were doing it was solely because it was the right thing to do. He was taking an ethical stance to make sure everybody felt welcome and accepted in the NFL. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think actually more business leaders should take that standpoint. Unfortunately, a lot of people have a self-interest motivation. They're very selfish when it comes to their motivation. And so if they're going to benefit more economically by siding with people that agree that we shouldn't be diverse, they're going to do that. And that's a problem. Um, the diversity dividend. The diversity dividend is the effect of an organization implementing diversity and then finding an increase in overall productivity, leading to an increased profit. Byers and Stanberry noted that studies indicate organizations with a diverse leadership team tend to improve their profit margin. I'm going to take it a step further. So, since I picked on you for the other stuff, I'll pick you on one more time. We are on a board of directors for a multinational, multi-million-dollar corporation. And Natalie and Riley are not yet board members. So it's just us guys. Now, we could keep it just the guys club, and a lot of companies do that. Or we can actually elevate onto the board Riley and bring Natalie into a senior leadership position, maybe as a VP of marketing or something. Why would we do that? You see, studies have also shown that if we bring women into senior key positions, they actually will increase the organization's overall level of empathy and communication. We can benefit. There is an actual statistical correlation to a diverse and inclusive senior leadership team and profit, sustainable profit. So when I've had boards of directors in the past, and I've been on them and I've governed them and etc. I always want to have a diverse board. I want other cultures, genders, age groups represented because it's going to benefit the organization as a whole. Not to mention help us when we go into decision-making sessions. Critics claim that diversity programs reduce the organization's ability to earn profit. However, this has not been reflected in the research that both Byers and Stanberry discussed and that I've seen in 6, 7, 8, 10, 6 years of grad school. I've never seen research that show that these critics are right. Never. I've seen research proving they're wrong. Diversity is a positive factor to bring into an organization that does have financial benefits with it. Now, if that's the only reason we're bringing diversity and inclusion into the organization, ethically, we would be wrong. We should do it because, like the NFL gentleman I spoke of, it's the right thing to do. The profit, the financial benefit should just be an additional kudo, an additional benefit. Shouldn't be the driving reason. It's like applying CSR. Companies that apply CSR over about 3 year window, a 3 year window, they see a sustained increase in their profits. And yet many critics would say that no. CSR is not going to increase profits. It does. But you got to be patient. It's not instantaneous, it's not fast, but it is sustained. And that is something I think businesses and investors should want. Because those spikes of great profit followed by these just troughs of no profit, that's not going to make my bank account better as an investor. But a sustained profit going along, oh, that's some stock I can hold on to for a few decades. Who does diversity benefit? The textbook discussed how the internal stakeholders, employees, leadership, and the staff of the organization benefit from diversity. The external stakeholders also benefit from diversity through the increase in creativity and innovation that diversity brings with it. So we talked about that before, that diversity brings with it a multitude of perspectives. And when we accept that and bring that in, we get to a place where we can reject the status quo, the old way of doing things. Now, we learned lessons from that. We retain those lessons, but we're not going to repeat the same solution or policy or process every time because we're going to be creating what's called a systems archetype that's called fixes that fail. We're going to be repeating solutions that keep failing. But by breaking that cycle, learning the lessons, and allowing the chaos of this moment to lead us to creativity and innovation, we can actually develop something new and by far better that we wouldn't have thought about before. Can diversity bring problems with it? When a portion of the staff or leadership is stuck in old ways of thinking, such as standing against diversity, the organization may take longer to fully implement any diversity policy. Why do some people dislike diversity? Some people have believed logical fallacies or have been trapped in a cognitive bias like racism, sexism, ageism, or ableism that creates an environment hostile to diversity. What are logical fallacies? Okay, this isn't a logic class, so we're not going to graph it all out, but this is actually a branch of mathematics. Logic is a branch of mathematics. And we could actually graph the whole thing out. A logical fallacy is something like, have you ever heard of non sequitur? Non sequitur, that's a type of logical fallacy. Bandwagon effect. Bandwagon effect is a logical fallacy. Now, what that does is it shows our human psychological propensity to fall into these traps. Well, everybody's doing it. That's the bandwagon. Okay, what about all this misinformation that's all over the internet? That ties into one thing: people's logical fallacies and biases. They get trapped in that. They're stuck in an echo chamber. An echo chamber would be a logical fallacy. And later on, we call it groupthink. So an echo chamber is like one person stuck in an echo chamber. Groupthink is a group stuck in an echo chamber. So cognitive bias, that is things like cognitive dissonance. Those are things where our brains get stuck in certain ways of viewing things, and we can grow past it, but it takes work. It takes effort. Have I told you before about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala? Yeah. You're also in my other class too, so I probably mentioned it there. I'll go ahead and mention it here real quick. They found that people that have a propensity to buy into the misinformation that causes fear. So as we all know, social media uses algorithms, and if it's going to cause rage, it's going to be promoted high on the algorithm. Okay. So people that are really prone to fearing everything out there. So you see racism at the root of racism is really a sense of fear. Okay. Um, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, everybody has them. Now, if the prefrontal cortex is more developed, so it's a little larger than it normally is, a person is more prone towards empathy, logic, things like that. And this isn't just me saying this. There are studies out there over the last couple of years that point this out, and it's a fact. Now, if a person is based in fear, they're making decisions based on fear, self-preservation, preservation of their family, a lot of fear based. Their amygdala will be more developed and larger. Now, the good thing is, while genetics has some say in how big your prefrontal cortex or your amygdala are, the brain is plastic, meaning we can actually structure it. We can restructure it in many ways. So by meditation, being around people from different countries, different cultures, exposing ourselves to other ideas, not being stuck in an echo chamber, we can actually over time increase the size of our prefrontal cortex, which leads us to have more empathy. Now we can do the reverse as well. We can only surround ourselves with negative people, people who are based in fear. Our prefrontal cortex will kind of shrink and our amygdala will grow. And they can actually predict literally quite a bit based on those two parts of the brain. So there are genetics to this, but we can learn and our brain will adapt. In other words, we can grow past disliking diversity. We can grow past racism. We can go past all these isms. But we have got to be willing to confront the problems ourselves. And that is a problem you see with a lot of people. They lack the motivation. In other words, they don't see the benefit. They do a cost benefit analysis and they say it's not giving me enough of a benefit to spend the amount of resources on this. Or they get stuck in a sunk cost fallacy. Well, I've lived 53 years of my life with this mentality. I just should keep on with it. It's not worth changing it now. I've already had 53 years like this. I don't care if you're 93. It's never too late to learn to leave this bigotry behind. It's never too late to learn that you can be empathetic. So, moving on here. This is because they are stuck in the us versus them mentality. The us versus them can literally be based on anything. In racism, it's people that look like me. In gender, it's people who have my same gender. And you can base this on religion. You can base this on political party affiliation. You can base it on so many things. People get stuck in this us versus them. Anytime you encounter the us versus them, sit back and ask why. Why do Republicans and Democrats hate each other so much? Now, they may not hate the actual people, but the parties overall. There's a lot of animosity there. Why is that? We start asking these hard questions. We can dig through the us versus them, and we can see things a little bit more clearly. And that, I think, is important because that is the foundation of critical thinking skills. Byers and Stanberry pointed out that sometimes people resist any change. Therefore, they are against diversity simply because we have never done it that way before. Well, just because you never did it that way before, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Disability in the workplace. Byers and Stanberry noted that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990 to protect disabled workers. This is to protect the person during the hiring process. Also, it is to protect them if they become disabled after being hired. The company even must make certain accommodations for that disabled person, such as special chairs, devices, etc. I am disabled. Believe it or not, yes, I am. When I worked at the IRS, they had to buy me a special chair. It had like a million different points. It was like the most ergonomical chair I've ever seen in my life. And a tech had to come and get it set literally from my body. Companies that are caring about including everybody in their applicant pool, have got to make accommodations for the disabled. Also, when I was at the IRS, there were a few employees that were Muslim. They were allowed to go use one of the rooms that wasn't being used for their prayers, because in Islam, they have to pray several times a day. Not a problem. Here's a room, it's not being used. As long as no one is using it, feel free to use it. Those are the accommodations that businesses can make. Now, another accommodation is we're going to have a potluck. Everybody brings something, okay? We all bring something. But we're going to welcome people that bring stuff from their native land, their own cultural food. We're going to welcome that all in. We want all that brought in. We want it like a big mixing pot, basically. Everything brought together. That right there is diversity and inclusion practice in an organization in a way that's at the party level. The other one is at the functional level, a very personal, individual level. Here's a prayer room. Here's a chair. In my experience as a disabled individual, companies still try to use every loophole to get around that, though. And it's not just against disabled people, it's against Muslims, it's against everybody. They will find every loophole. In Islam, a woman has to wear a head covering, okay, out in public. And whether you agree with that or not, that's the way it is. So if we're going to bring that person to work in our company, let's say she happens to be a splendid chemist, and we need a splendid chemist, but we're against people wearing head coverings. We have a problem because we're going to lose out on a really good chemist by not accommodating that particular religious component of her life. So I say, why not allow that? Okay, so if we've got a clean room and she can't have the actual, there's ways, trust me, there are clean rooms and there are facilities all over this world that do both chemistry and make technology where they've got to wear the bunny suits just to keep the place sterile, and people are still able to live out in the accommodations that they need for their religion or their cultural practices. So that is an easy get around. To use that as a loophole is insane because we can easily work around that in a way that keeps our environment sterile. These loopholes, I see a lot in American businesses, not just with DEI, but with, well, it is kind of DEI, paying women fairly. Okay, so we're bringing you, sir, Noah, and Natalie in for an interview. Oh, wait a minute, she's qualified, but so are you. We're really against women getting paid more than men. So we changed the job title and a little bit of the description for you so we can pay you $20,000 less a year. That's another loophole that they do. I think I told you about that last week. But this is atrocious. These loopholes are just ways of people being able to find how they can legally discriminate against others. And I think that's a horrible thing about our particular culture and the way our laws are set up right now. However, I'm not going to harp on that any longer. I could, but I'm not going to. Byers and Stanberry pointed out that the word reasonableness is significant in the legislation. The legislation is worded using that particular word. This means that the required accommodation must be reasonable and not prohibitive to the work to be done or too costly to provide. You can already start seeing the loopholes developing, right? So providing our employees who are of Islamic faith a room that they can go pray in 3 times a day, suddenly, well, it's not cost effective. So they use that as their basis. A disabled person in a chair with a brilliant brain. Can we think of one? Oh, Stephen Hawking, before he passed away. Would you fire Stephen Hawking if you needed a physicist? You'd be a fool to, but it would not be reasonable because we would have to install the ramps. It wouldn't be cost effective to be able to allow to accommodate his chair. We would lose out on the most brilliant physicist there ever has been recently, at least. And I think that's atrocious, but that's what companies do. They find these loopholes and they exploit them. Religious diversity is also covered under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Non-belief is also included under this protection. I was raised Pentecostal. My bachelor's and my first master's, I have a bachelor's in religion and I have a master of arts in theological studies. I graduated seminary. Graduating with the master's in theology allows for me to be able to academically teach philosophy because there's such an intersection between those two areas. They're virtually the same. Um, However, after seminary, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more than I sometimes tell, I looked at what all I had learned in seminary and I said, I just don't ethically feel I can teach people this, do this when, and to think this way when I no longer think that way. And without going into a great long story, I had lost my faith after going and graduating seminary. So for ethical reasons, I quit being a pastor because I had been a pastor for 10 years. I didn't think it was right for me to tell people this is how you should believe when I myself didn't believe that anymore. Okay. Um, in the process, I realized that I was pretty agnostic. I just don't know. Is there a God out there? I don't know. So I'm functionally an atheist because I don't practice a religion. I, by default, fall into the camp of being an atheist. But if you put it on a spectrum where 10 is like hyper atheist and militant atheist, I'm probably about a 7. I'm in that middle zone. I'm in the, I don't know, if maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't. I don't know. But I'm not living a life of any belief, therefore I'm functionally an atheist. There could be something out there. And one day, when I have enough evidence, I have the right to choose to believe that. Until then, I have the right to also just go, I don't know. Everybody should have a right. If somebody wants to have, they grew up Catholic or they feel drawn to the Catholic faith, I say thumbs up. If somebody, I've had students that were actually in ministry in Christian denominations, and I never once tried to talk them out of their faith. That's not my place in this world. My place is to teach you what I need to for this class. And if we're covering material that might help you in what you're doing as a minister, I'm going to help raise you up in that. If you become a better minister after being one of my students, then awesome. I have not failed. I have succeeded. So I don't think I'm out there to deconvert people. And I'm not like in the movie God is Not Dead, where Kevin Sorbo's character was a philosophy professor and he was trying to make all of his students into atheists. Otherwise, he'd fail them out of the class. First of all, there's no professor that would do that. That's insane. Second of all, it's a trope. It was a trope that was told in very fundamentalist circles that professors were going to do that to their children. It was a lie that was repeated over and over and over. So anyway, at the end of the day, if somebody has faith, if somebody doesn't have faith, it shouldn't matter. They should be in an environment without discrimination. Byers and Stanbury pointed out that there are 4 main tenets under this law: non-discrimination, non-harassment, non-retaliation, and reasonable accommodation. Religious diversity, legal protection for religious diversity, includes only bona fide religions or religious beliefs. In other words, you can't just make up a new religion and say, here it is. Okay, well, in Seinfeld, what was that episode? Instead of Christmas, they had another holiday that they came up with and made up. You can't do that. You can't just make up your own holidays. So it has to be something where there's obviously, legally, it would be that there's like a text that you follow. There are practices that you adhere to. There's a core tenet, a group of tenets of faith. So that would make a religion. And you find that's true whether it's with Wicca, they have all that, Buddhism, Hinduism, all the different religions, they fall under this category and they should be protected by this law. The company has to demonstrate proof of hardship if the requested religious accommodation is too extreme. The employer does not need to provide unrealistic accommodations. There is a distinction between cultural heritage and religion. Okay. So if we go in, and I'm going to make this up so I don't offend anybody anywhere at any point in time. And let's say there's a world religion known as Iggy Wiggyism. It's the best thing that can come out of my head. And one of our tenets is that every Friday we walk up and slap everybody of the opposite gender. That would not be an appropriate thing to allow in our workplace. Now, if you do that on your own time as an Iggy Wiggyist, no problem. We're not going to judge you. But in our workplace, you're not going to practice that because that doesn't meet the criteria. That is extreme. It's also going to create hardship for the people getting slapped. So we can draw the line when things do get extreme. But I'm going to say right now, in my experience, most of the world religions don't include extreme things like that. Most of the world religions are very peaceful. And they also allow for their adherents to refrain from certain things at certain times. You don't have to always do a certain practice externally. Sometimes you can just do it internally with a lot of religions out there. So there, once again, is a middle ground that the employee and the employer can come to. So we've got to make sure that it's not unrealistic. Now, that can also be another loophole. The organization could say having the ability to go to Mass on Good Friday is unrealistic because our factory runs 24/7. Well, ideally, we probably have employees off the clock that day that don't go to Good Friday that could come in and fill a shift for somebody who does practice Good Friday. So there's a solution. It's not unrealistic. Continuing, Byers and Stanbury also pointed out that religious accommodations may include special items of clothing being permitted, meaning the uniform might have to be altered. Special permission for variations in grooming, hairstyle, beard allowance, time for prayers or meditations, religious expressions, dietary considerations. Take, for instance, someone of the Sikh belief. Males in the Sikh religion wear a turban. They're never without their turban, okay, out in public. They also have a ceremonial, it's like a little dagger. And most of the time, they're not even sharp. It's a ceremonial thing, it's a religious thing. Those, as long as we don't have any prohibitions against metal on our work floor, like certain types of labs that use a lot of magnets or stuff like that, MRI machines, there would be no reason for that person not to be allowed to have that on them. And the hair turban, there's no reason. The British military has Sikhs that have served and still serve, and they wear, and the same thing in the Canadian forces, if I'm not mistaken. So we can actually deal with that. It's not a major problem. The beards, well, the problem with the beard is, and many militaries will allow under certain circumstances, and somebody being Sikh would definitely be one that would be approved. When you're in an environment and you got to have NBC garments, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, you have to put on this whole suit to protect you, including a gas mask. A beard makes it so the seal doesn't actually form against the skin, and the gas will get in and will kill the person. And so, in certain environments, facial hair cannot be permitted. So I'm sorry, Riley, no beard. So that would be a reason. That would be unreasonable at that point to allow somebody to have a beard. However, under most conditions, most of these things should be permissible. Now we're going to look specifically a little bit more at the religious diversity focused towards atheism / agnostic non-belief. The authors noted that the Supreme Court has set a precedent allowing non-theistic beliefs, atheists, agnostics, to be protected under the law. This brings us to the discussion on religious tolerance. America has a religious tolerance codified into the Constitution. But is it found in every workplace? It isn't. Religious intolerance is still a problem, and this includes intolerance for non-believers as well. So basically, humans have this unique ability of being able to find something about anyone to exclude them based on. And I think that is a horrible aspect of our species, but it is there. We need to, as a company, we need to be welcoming of those of all different religions and those who have no affiliation or faith or practice or belief themselves. They shouldn't be treated otherwise. They shouldn't be treated like a second-rate citizen. Sexual orientation and discrimination in America. Not every state has laws prohibiting discrimination against a person's sexual orientation. At the federal level, the Defense of Marriage Act of 1996 restricted federal interpretations of marriage and spouse to opposite-sex unions only. This codified discrimination against one's sexual orientation in the hiring process. This law was repealed by the Respect for Marriage Act in 2020. However, the legal battle is far from over, and the law could be changed yet again. This was written about a year ago, a year and a half ago. And so I don't know where the law is at currently, but that is one of those areas. It depends on how strong a certain subset of society here in this country is, how vocal they are, and how much political power they have at that moment. And when we see certain subsets with more political power, we see that sexual discrimination or discrimination against sexual orientation actually becomes something that's permissible versus not being allowed. Here again, I go to, why don't we just sit back and say, how would I feel if I was in that person's situation? If I didn't have the same proclivities as everyone else, would I want to be discriminated against? The answer is going to be no, for honest. However, that's not a question we see a lot of people honestly asking themselves and honestly answering. Um, the ethics of everything here, Byers and Stanberry discuss the opportunity ethical leaders have to treat each person equally, regardless of their sexual orientation. Studies have revealed that organizations providing equal treatment to all employees, regardless of their sexual orientation, have seen an increase in their profit margin. Shocking. We've seen that several times already today, haven't we? That if we just do the right thing because it's right, we can actually improve our profit margin. Will companies continue? Wait, this topic will be an interesting one to continue to watch as I age and as America keeps bouncing around on where it sits on the moral compass. Have you ever done that thing where you answer a bunch of questions and it shows you where you are on the moral compass? It says if you're like conservative, if you're independent, if you're liberal, if you're Democrat, Republican. It's actually pretty neat. Even keeping in mind that there's no actual test out there that isn't subjective. I mean, yeah, that isn't subjective. So they're always going to be subjective. When you take these things, keep that in mind because you do it in a year, you might be in a different spot on there. It's all subjective. It's how you feel at this moment. But it is enlightening to see where you are at this moment as an individual. Will companies continue to implement non-discrimination policies, or will they revert to discriminatory policies? The Human Rights Campaign Foundation put out an index showing which states have the most LGBTQ plus friendly companies. And that's what we're looking at. And the year 2014, because this in the book it was 2018, but the report was published in 2014. Maryland was at the top of the list. At the bottom of this list would be Kentucky. Okay, so this just gives an idea. This is the states with the highest percentage of companies that are being very equitable when it comes to sexual orientation. The data for 2024 reflecting each state's non-discrimination policies regarding employment and sexual orientation are coming up next. And so basically states that are green, these are states that expressly prohibit employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The one that's blue, which there's Wisconsin, states that expressly prohibit employment discrimination based on sexual orientation only. And those that have no color, so the light gray ones, enforcement, oh wait, no, those are the ones that have the yellow border. So there's the light gray, then there's some that are green that have a light border. Enforcement authorities are accepting complaints on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity because the state has adopted the Bostock rationale into state law. So across one nation, we see many different areas or regions that they're not all doing the same thing. It can make it confusing. Okay, some places it's legal to discriminate. In other places, it isn't. Now, we're talking a lot about sexual identity here, and it's a very important thing, but let's think about race for a minute. It was about 6 years ago, I think it was, and I heard a United States senator saying that the Supreme Court was going to have to look into repealing the laws and legislation that allow for interracial marriages. Let that sink in. That's going back to saying that only people who are white can marry white people. Only people who are African American can marry African Americans. If you're Hispanic or Korean, it's one of those things where you might fall into a category where you can only be with someone of your own. You see what I'm saying? This creates a bad problem. And who the are we to say who somebody can and cannot love? We can't even define what love is. To me, that's irrational, but that's just me. Income inequality. Byers and Stanbury in 2018 discussed that the middle class in America has been shrinking. The top 1% in America have increased their annual income, while the middle class has remained virtually flat. The authors pointed out that the middle class has shrunk by 13% when compared to prior decades. And here's a graph that's basically just showing that the top 1%, they're holding a majority of everything, a super majority of all the money. The bottom 10%, the bottom nine, look at that. It's just the income inequality. It's just so drastic. Compared to the top 1%, nobody has money. Even the top 1%, and these are millionaires. At the 1% level, you're a millionaire level. But the top 0.01% or the 0.1%, they have it all. Those are the multi-billionaires. Net worth for families by income tier. So the blue, that's the upper income. Green is middle income. And the orange is lower income. Look at the disparity there between the different tiers. And the middle class is a shrinking group. It really is. There's been a push for several decades now, basically to siphon wealth from the middle class, thus increasing the size of the poor category, the poverty group, into siphoning all that money up into that top tier level. My question is, these people own businesses, these in the very top tier. Who's buying your products if you're taking everyone's ability to have income? How are you able to generate income as a business if you're not making it so that people, your workers, your customers can afford your products? The middle class comprises a majority of the customer base in America. Even though it has shrunk, it still comprises a significant portion. This reduces the spending power that this market share. So when you reduce the size of the middle class, you reduce their ability to put money into the economy. It has a financial impact on the profitability of the companies and also affects our overall national economy. What can be done? Well, we can increase the minimum wage at the federal level. As of 2018, only 29 states have a minimum wage that exceeds the federal level. As of 2009, the federal minimum wage level was at $7.25. Anybody know what it is now? Okay, see, that's a substantial good change, but also got to look at the cost of living. The cost of living goes up. As the cost of living goes up, so too should the minimum wage. Otherwise, a person who's able to meet their bills at minimum wage, when the cost of living goes up, they now can't meet their bills. They're now back into a poverty level. What is considered middle class in America? According to Investopedia in 2024, the middle class is determined by the annual income and the number of adults. Single individuals is $30,000 to $90,000. That's an annual amount. Married couples is 42,000 plus to 127,000, and that should be a dollar sign. Family of three, it's 60,000 to 202,000. The authors pointed out that women are generally paid 80% less than their male counterparts. Some states are trying to pass legislation to rectify this. A few states have already succeeded. And we're not the only country that has this pay gap. When I was in grad school, I was looking in Australia, and they have a huge pay gap problem there too. And I'm assuming most of the Western nations do. Should women be paid the same as men when employed in a comparable position? Absolutely. Absolutely. Equal pay for equal work. That's an ethical concept. As we discussed last week, some companies use loopholes to get around this. The authors noted that areas like Rhode Island, Boulder, Colorado, and Berkeley, California, lead the way in enacting legislation recognizing individuals as guardians, not owners of their animals, thus giving animals legal status beyond just being items of property. This is dealing about animal rights. The movement, and I seem to have, there we go. The movement to give animals rights to animals began during the last half of the 19th century. You have the Humane Slaughter Act of 1958, and that was the first law passed to protect animals. Animals have been and still are in some jurisdictions used to test chemicals, makeup, and various things. Very cruel. Business ethics includes recognizing animal rights and humane treatment of them. This includes animals raised for food consumption. I have a pet, a dog. I don't see him as my property. To me, he's family. He's my roommate. He's my buddy. And I know some people just see their pets as just an animal, but I don't think that's fair. I don't think that gives them the justice for the intellect that they possess. Now, he may not have a humanity like we do, but he has I hate to say personality, a doganality, where a cat would have a catanality, but they have personalities. They have the ability to use their intelligence. Some species of dogs can actually remember like 27 different commands or items. Border collies are among some of the most brilliant. There are animals out there that are just brilliant. Now, granted, they're not the same level as us. That's okay. We should, I think, respect them as fellow inhabitants of this planet. I'm not against raising beef to eat, even though I'm a vegetarian. I'm not against eating fish, even though I don't eat fish currently. But I don't think we should torture the animals. Chicken farms tend to be really bad. They're basically torturous industries. The animals get sick and there's all kinds of problems. I say take care of them, even if you're raising them just for food. We should have an ethical liability, a responsibility to take care of this critter. So that's going to be today's lecture. We're going to pick back up on Wednesday. Are there any questions? I try not to go on too many tangents and personal tangents, but sometimes you just really can't help. I mean, there are things that even I, as a professor, I'm still human and I feel very passionate about. I'm very against racism and discrimination and sexism. To me, they're intolerable for our species. No questions? You're free to roam about the cabin. You do the same and or likewise. Okay, those are online. That'll be it. I'll see you on Wednesday.